That way, if folks want to go back, perfect. That way, if folks want to go back, watch the other video and then come back through this one, you'll have access to that. So I want to, hi everyone, thanks so much for being here. I'm in Star Prairie, Wisconsin, where the temperature is below zero, below 32, below freezing. Right now, we have snow on the ground. I'm not ready for it. So I'm just picturing that you all are in much warmer weather. Or maybe not that much warmer. So it would be helpful to me if you could either unmute yourself and tell me who you are or put it in the chat. And basically what I want to know is what role you play in your organization. So if you could tell me your name, your organization, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a legal advocate, whether you're an advocate that wants to learn more about that works along with systems, and you want to learn more about that, or if you're a clinician and you want to learn more about kind of how your role would play in that kind of with legal advocacy. Does that make sense, what I just said? Hopefully. Okay, cool. All right, so we have, thank you so much. Your resident advocate for intimate partner violence victims through House of Ruth. And am I right? Are you in Maryland? Oh, awesome. I grew up in that area, not in Baltimore though, where I think you are. Yeah, awesome. Okay. And then Turning Point, sexual assault victim advocate. Okay, awesome. Crisis line coordinator at Interact, Wake County. Awesome. This is super, super helpful. Other folks. Human trafficking specialist with NACASA. Oh my God, that's awesome. You train and provide technical assistance for regional RCCs. Is that regional coordinating councils or?
It's rape crisis centers. Yeah, sorry for the acronym. I also serve as the regional response team coordinator for the state. So
awesome.
Yes.
Okay. You might want to go back, Courtney, if you haven't had a chance to do this, you might want to go back and watch the DID sessions that we did. There were 3 of them, just because DID is pretty common for victims of human trafficking.
Yeah, thank you. We do get a lot of questions about that. So that's one of the reasons I'm tagging along. So thank you.
Oh, awesome.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Okay, and let's see, we have a volunteer court navigator for Interact, Wake County, victim advocate for sexual assault, domestic violence through partnership of Ash, North Carolina, bicultural therapist in Asheville. Okay, I love Asheville, just saying that right up front. So awesome. And I love that you're a bicultural advocate, just saying. Okay. Legal advocate with Center for Community Solutions. Okay, awesome. All right. This is really, really helpful. Thank you so much for doing this. And please, 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 any questions that come up, please go ahead and enter them into the chat at any point in time. Lee and I have been doing quite a few of these sessions together, so we have a rhythm now, and it's super casual. So, okay, so I want to talk a little bit. Okay, oh yeah, can you just tell me, will you let me know if you've had a chance to watch the video? So if you had a chance to watch the video, if you could just put yes, or like nodding is good, or shaking your head. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. No worries if you didn't, because, you know, we just I think we just got that to you like a couple days ago or a day ago. So no worries. Okay, awesome. A lot of you have. Okay, good. Okay, because I want to be able to reference it, but I don't want to reference it too much if there's a lot of you who did not have a chance to watch it, because I don't, it can be frustrating. So the video is heavy because in the video, I talk about my experience of growing up in a home with sexual violence. And so I talk about I'm an adult survivor of child sexual abuse. I talk about then how trauma forms from those acts. So I get into heavy stuff. I don't get into like exactly like graphic descriptions of violence, but I talk about the fact I experienced a lot of abuse. And so I talk about it. So that's why it's heavy. But the point of that video is to show you, even though you already know this, most of you, but just to validate for you and to like really, really connect how violence and trauma are so connected. And then how trauma then changes the way that I talk about, how I remember, how I talk about, how I think about what happened to me. And that then, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about trauma informed legal advocacy. Now, most of the time when I'm presenting this, I'm presenting it to lawyers. And I recognize that it doesn't look like a lot of you are lawyers, but I'd still like to present the material in that way, because I think it is still going to be helpful for you to know kind of what they should be thinking about. So I don't think it's like so nitpicky that you're gonna be bored. Does that sound okay for folks? And I'm gonna show you kind of like what trauma-informed legal advocacy should be like. I also, and Leah, I can't remember if I sent these to you or not, so I'm gonna send them to you again after our webinar. But I have some tip sheets that I developed a few years ago. One is on trauma-informed legal advocacy. One is trauma-informed courts. And another one is on trauma-informed advocacy. But that tip sheet, these all are dovetailed together. That tip sheet is for victim advocates that are part of systems. So you all will likely know all this stuff, but I'm going to still send it so that, because I think that sometimes you're going to be working with a victim advocate in the prosecutor's office or in law enforcement. And I think the information is good just across the board anyway. Okay. Yeah, we did quite a few. Thanks, Leah. This is the last webinar in a series. We did quite a few, and I think they're all recorded, right? Okay, cool.
Yep, they're all recorded.
And also, if you don't want to watch a whole long, like the DID ones are 90 minutes each. I also did shorter, like 35-minute videos, 3 of them on DID that you have access to. One is basically what it is and how it comes about, what it feels like to have it. The second is the healing process. And the third is what it means for your work. So a lot of guidance around how to work with people with DID. Okay. All right, I'm going to share my screen and let me do that. Oh, by the way, I live with 2 dogs and my office and my partner as well, and a cat, by the way, but the cat's not an issue. My partner is about to leave and a black lab is going to come in here, because if he's out in the house by himself, he will get on our counters. He knows where we keep the peanut butter. He knows how to open our refrigerator. He knows how to open our freezer. It's a disaster out there. So there's a big sliding glass door right here. And when I'm in a training and somebody drives down the driveway, he goes nuts. So you may hear some of that. So, okay, we're gonna have fun together. I'm gonna share my screen and, oh, wait a second. It's not seeing. All right. Let's see, here we go again. Share my screen. There it is. Okay, so we're going to talk about a little bit of two things. We're going to talk about creating culturally responsive and trauma-informed legal advocacy. And so what I'm hoping to cover, and Leah, you'll just jump in if something comes up, right?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so what I'm hoping to do in this training is explore how trauma can impact your cases or the cases of the survivors that you work with, examine what trauma-informed legal advocacy is and what this means for your work with clients. So again, like this is really kind of focused on how lawyers work with sexual assault and human trafficking, really survivors who've experienced trauma. Okay, so I just kind of wanted to just check in with folks. The video about my experience is sometimes hard to view. If any of you who have seen it have questions about it, I am totally happy to answer any of those questions. And it was just a kind of a check-in to see if folks are doing okay after having watched it, have any, concerns or questions about like clients who they have who might have similar experiences. So if you do and you want to enter those questions and stuff in the chat, that would be great. And I'll try to address them as they come up. All right, so. Okay, whoops, that is not where I wanted to start. Here we go. Okay, so there's a couple things that I was hoping that video will kind of pull out for you. One is basically how trauma forms. So in our society, we have talked about trauma coming up from violence over the past, I want to say 12 to 15 years, we've been talking a lot more about trauma, the neurobiology of violence and trauma. But I also want to just name right up front, because we are mainstream and our services are pretty much designed for survivors who, for the most part, are white, that can walk in, that speak English, that have citizenship. Like that's kind of our norm in our society that we set up programs for. So then that means we talk about violence as coming up, trauma is coming up from violence, but trauma also comes up from oppression. So microaggressions, racism, the ways in which people who are different are treated as though different is less than also causes trauma. And I think in that video, I kind of lay out for you the ways in which my family was treated differently and how that kind of interlaid trauma for me. So it's really important to make this connection and to realize that oppression and how we have experienced it, as well as the violence, impacts how we experience the world. And also oppression, as well as the violence, impacts how we interact with systems. And when you are working as part of a system or helping a survivor get through a system, you need to recognize the impact that oppression has had on them. So if you're working, and part of that is recognizing your own privilege so that you can check with yourself. Okay, I don't go through that because these programs are set up for me. Like someone like me is going to be able to get through this. I don't have to worry about whether I have documentation or not. For when I came here, I don't have to worry about how like, I'll just show you my privilege. I'm Latinx, I'm gender nonconforming, I have DID, I'm queer, but I speak English and I'm a US citizen and I'm resourced. I was able to access a legal education and be able to pay for it. So there's a lot of ways in which I am privileged in our society. I am not Black. I pass. I live in rural Wisconsin and I pass. It would be really hard to be in rural Wisconsin and be Black and gender nonconforming and queer and have DID. But most people, yeah.
Hey, sorry. We have a question and I wanted to just make sure that everyone kind of understands what you mean when you say you pass.
Oh, yes. Thanks, Leah. Okay. Meaning I am, and then I'll come back to the question. So I have really, really light skin. And this, by the way, happened as I aged. I got lighter and lighter. I don't sound like I spoke Spanish first. I moved through the world here like I was raised in Wisconsin. So I don't seem a lot different. I adapted my language. I'm very, very adaptable, which a lot of survivors are. If you hear an accent, it's more a Minnesota, Wisconsin accent than anything else. So I fit in. People don't look at me, other than the fact that I'm gender nonconforming, people don't look at me and think I'm different. So I moved through the world with a certain amount of safety, but my experience is still one where oppression was interwoven. But it's really important to me to know that my experience is different than someone whose skin is going to be darker, or who has an accent, who doesn't move through the world as easily as I do in this area. And if I don't check in with my own sense of privilege, then I think I give people guidance that is based on my experience when their experience might be very different. I'm just going to raise my desk. So it's very important to recognize, whoops, my desk did not like that. Oh, okay, my desk is not wanting to raise, so I'm going to stay sitting. Sorry. It's really important for me to recognize and be very aware of the privilege that I have, so that when I'm doing any work with folks, I'm giving them guidance based on their experience. So that's why this is really important to think about. Okay, I'm going to stop there. And what is our question?
Someone asked that you mentioned people testing your stare or flat affect. Could you say more about that?
Yes. So in the video, right? Okay. So in the video, I talk about how violence then left me dissociating. So dissociation is this thing that just about everybody can do. And it gives you a little bit of a break from something intense, overwhelming, or traumatic. Because I grew up in a home that was really violent and I couldn't escape it, instead, I used dissociation to survive it. So my go-to coping mechanism was then dissociation. And when you dissociate, you have a stare, and the things that happened to me didn't feel like they happened to me. Even though I know that they did, they feel like they happened to someone else. So there's a distance that I have from what happened to me. And so then I'm going to talk about it very, very flat and distant. So the and this plays out in a court proceeding, which I'll talk a little bit about. But what happened to me was, because I didn't know that I was doing this, and because that was my go-to response, and my limbic system was reacting to things that were probably safe but didn't feel safe, and then I would go to dissociation, that people who want to cause harm to others, people who want to perpetrate violence against others, test people. So that, and we call that grooming. They test to see, are you going to be someone who I can exert power over? Are you going to push me away, yell, run? You know, what is your response to a feeling of being threatened? So, and I'll give you an example. When I was in college, I'd go to bars with my friends, and people that go to colleges that we know now are probably predators, who are twice the age of the co-eds in the college. Those kind of guys would find me, ask me to dance, and I would agree to dance, not because I really wanted to, but I'm also, people who've experienced a lot of violence are very agreeable. So, or very appeasing or accommodating. So that I would agree to dance, and then they would dance very inappropriately with me. And what they would see is that I wouldn't push away, I wouldn't make any effort to stop them. But what I would do is my stare would deepen, meaning that I would dissociate. And that lets them know then, okay, here's somebody who I can do stuff to. So that's what I mean by testing that stare, that flat affect. They would hear that and see that. And it was probably the stare more than anything. But then they would see, okay, is this someone who I can have power over and do what I want to do with. So I hope that that's responsive. Okay, cool. Yeah, anytime, Courtney. I love questions, so anytime. Okay, so that piece around privilege is really important when you're working with survivors. So then and this is perfect timing, Courtney, that question, because this is what happens in legal cases. What happens is that trauma shows up in two key ways, which complicates a survivor's ability to participate or be believed in any kind of system proceeding, whether it's, and it doesn't even have to be a proceeding, it's like whether law enforcement is talking to someone, trying to get the information from them. We're going to have, can they participate in this investigation, and will they be believed? Trauma impacts that and goes all the way through our systems. If they're involved in child welfare, it'll factor in there. If they're in court, it'll factor in there. If they're in landlord-tenant proceedings, if they're in a judicial proceeding, not judicial, like a campus proceeding where they've said someone has sexually assaulted them, trauma is going to show up, and it's going to affect whether they can participate and whether they will have credibility. So in the participation, will your client or will the survivor's trauma prevent them from participating in their case? Will it prevent them from participating in the prep of their case? And what I mean by that is, will they get triggered and either go away or struggle with the participation? So for me, I'm just going to center DID into this. So I created parts to survive growing up in a home that was so violent. So if I'm in a proceeding, will I get triggered and switch? And will I be able to remember what we're talking about and what I need to do? And for somebody else who doesn't have DID, will they get triggered and then not be able, like, become hysterical or feel panicky or go away in their head? check out, basically. So that's one thing that you have to figure out when you're working with people that are trying to get through a system response. The other piece is client credibility. So that stare and that flat affect, Courtney, right? Will I be believed? Will people be believed? Because the trauma impact of how someone talks about something is different than what we think in our society it should be. I see this a lot. I love podcasts, and I talk about this. I think this is the third time I've been talking about this. We, in our society, we don't really get trauma. In our work, we get trauma, but in our society, we don't get trauma. So I hear oftentimes, I do those true crime podcasts, and I hear the podcasters talking about victim and witness behavior on the stand. And to me, it cries out trauma, like that's trauma all over the place. And the podcaster, not knowing anything about it, is saying all the things that I'm talking about here. Well, you know, they were really distant. They were really cold. They were combative. They didn't seem to remember things. That's really key. That is actually showing you that that person experienced trauma. So will the jury or the judge or the adjudicator in some other way, will they be believed? And so the challenges that survivors have is, one, will they trust the system? And I'll just say right now, that's a conversation to have with anyone who is marginalized. Is the system a safe and fair place for them? Is this something like they really need to want to do this in order to get through it? I don't know anyone who has gone through a response to sexual violence and have actually gone through the whole thing and felt good about the system, even if they won their case. It's just painful. It's really, really difficult. And it's very, very triggering. It's inherently triggering. So here's kind of like, if you saw the video, this is kind of where I'm going. Will I trust the system? Will I show any emotion whatsoever that people tend to expect when you're talking about things that are so awful? Or will I show too much emotion? Will I get triggered and reach into a part of me that experienced a lot of fear, and will I then start showing a lot of emotion, which then makes it hard for people to believe you because you're so dramatically different? Will I remember what we talked about in prepping? If I'm dissociating a lot, even if I didn't have parts, if I'm dissociating a lot, I might not remember a lot of what we talked about in prepping. And will I even be able to participate? Meaning, if I'm not familiar with trauma and its effect on me, I won't know until it's time to go whether I can actually go. And I've talked to so many advocates that have been the one that's had to go to survivor's home the day that they're going to testify and make them go because they're panicking and don't feel like, and I don't want advocates to be in that position. So this is a big reason why I think trauma informed legal advocacy is really important. So the impact on participation is that victims can be triggered by either the violence or the oppression or both. So that being judged in a courtroom proceeding or in a campus proceeding or CPS or wherever it is, that sense of being judged taps in to the trauma of oppression. And so people will get combative really, really easily in those situations. So knowing that the legal system and our systems in general are adversarial in nature, and the adversarial aspects of it is very triggering for survivors. So knowing that that's the situation is important, and preparing survivors for that is important. And because a lot of people are used to systems and either the way something's investigated, prosecuted, adjudicated, whatever the case, they're so used to it that they forget that the system is really triggering and very adversarial, and makes it really hard for people to participate. The opposing party will often try to trigger victims. They're not thinking in their heads, at least for the most part, that they're trying to trigger someone, but they are combative. They know, oftentimes the person that's caused harm will know some things about that survivor that then their representative, their lawyer, or whoever will seize upon, because lawyers think that everything is fair in representing people. And so making a survivor look crazy is totally a tactic. So that's going to be really difficult for survivors. And then when triggered, those survivors might re-experience the traumatic incident. So they might withdraw and dissociate. They might show signs of distress, which could be very different from folks. It might be crying hysterically. It might be asthma attacks. And also they might show anger and defensiveness. And it's really hard in those situations for judges and juries to believe. And then they when someone comes across as very angry, then they're less likable as well. So they are seen as part of the problem. Okay, now we doing okay, Leah, with questions?
Yes, no question.
Awesome. Okay, so what you can do. Okay, so you want to center that survivor's experience of violence and oppression. Oftentimes what we do is we center our services or our prep or what we need from that survivor, but you have to go the other way around. We have to center their experience. And in your work with them, it has to be centered every step along the way. And you cannot ignore it. If you ignore it, you will come across problems as you get closer to the whatever the adjudication or the proceeding or event is. And once you do that, it will sabotage your case. And either because they can't participate or because they won't be believed. So when you center it, you're looking for signs of trauma. You're looking for like, you're talking about how are you going to help this person get through it? Every time through each thing that you do, you're going to come back to that when you're centering it. And that might not be very much. It might be, does that feel okay to you? Does this feel doable? Like, it'll be a kind of regularly checking in. So the impact that you'll see on participation, meaning the signs of trauma, will look like a lack of follow-up, meaning, so like I said, because of the trauma I experienced, I became very, very accommodating, agreeable, or compliant, meaning I will agree to things, but then will not follow through with them. And this is a really common thing for survivors. They want to be helpful. And also that level of trauma will leave them being very appeasing, but then actually going, when it's time to do it, either they don't feel like they can and they haven't talked to you about it. So if you find that someone is not following through, then you want to gently explore what might be behind this. And I say gently because we are going to hear it. Survivors like me are going to hear it as something that we're doing wrong, because we did agree that this is going to be something that we're going to do, and then we don't do it. So you want to be able to really gently say, you know, we talked about you doing this, but I realized that maybe that wasn't a good idea. Maybe there's a way that we can get someone else to help you with this, or maybe you and I can work on this together, or, you know, basically to make it easier for them to do. If it's possible to do that. So you partner with them in getting something done, as opposed to, hey, so when are you going to get to that? The other thing that you'll see is that they might be unable to remember. So if you're not used to seeing a dissociative stare, you might be missing it. So if they're not remembering things, it's likely that they're dissociating through meetings that they're having with you. So you might want to look for signs of dissociation, and what I talked about in the video. The signs of dissociation are that stare, that kind of flat tone, the scatteredness in talking, and then just kind of like someone who's observing and not really engaged, you know, someone who's really withdrawn. So then if you see signs of dissociation, then you want to gently explore them. And meaning I'm noticing these things and I'm wondering if our meetings are really hard. So I'm noticing that you have a little bit of a stare, and I know a lot of my clients or a lot of survivors that I work with dissociate to get through some of this stuff. And I don't know if you know what dissociation is. And then, you know, it's kind of like a giving information and getting information, because then they can kind of keep an eye on how much they're dissociating. And then come up with strategies for how together you might get what you need the survivor to do. Okay. So another thing that you want to think about, oh yeah, I did this. So gently explore. Oh yeah. So here are some of the things. If you are noticing that they are dissociating quite a bit, then what you might want to explore is, is your space something that's chaotic for them? And that's why they're dissociating. Is your office setting too closed in? Are you sitting too close to this person? Or is there something about the location of where you're meeting hard for them? And because that might be something that you can fix to help them to be more present as you're working with them. Whereas just the topic itself might be very, very difficult, and is why they're dissociating. So then you might have to come up with a different plan on how you work together better. And maybe you go slower, take more time, and talk about it a little bit differently. Talk around it as opposed to directly on it. So again, the legal proceedings, the ways in which people have a hard time participating in the process is because they're inherently triggering. So if it's at all possible, exploring testimony, like since the pandemic, there's been a little bit more flexibility in different proceedings for video testimony. So I would explore that. And I would for sure prepare early for any kind of system response. So if they're going to participate in an investigation or prosecution or anything that involves a system, start planning as early as you can and take as much time as possible. And then the last thing that's really, really helpful for people is making things as predictable as possible. Okay, Leah, I saw that you unmuted.
I did, yes. We have two questions. So the first one is, when a client is unable to follow through, does it mean the therapist did something wrong for them to close up, or is it due to another reason?
Oh yeah, when a client is unable to follow through, it's not so much that a therapist did something wrong. It'll be, it could be that it could be like 10 different things. It could be that they switched. It could be that they dissociated and didn't track the information, or it could be that they thought that that was going to be easier, that they wanted to be able to do it, but then when they go to do it, they can't make themselves go to do it. So it could be any of those things, and it's not going to be the therapist's fault. For the therapist, they need to pay attention to the fact that it's not happening and explore what's behind that. And then you'll start getting to a little bit of the heart of the problem. And that's actually a lot of the work that a therapist would do. So it's really good thing to notice and then talk about. Oh, Matt, you're muted.
Thank you.
Okay,
Sorry. Thank you. And then the second question is, in times of COVID, creating a trauma-informed space can be difficult with having to place up boundaries and whatnot. Any tips in creating a place in which victims feel safe while in these pandemic times?
Yeah. So being as approachable, building rapport, like you have to work a little bit harder at creating rapport with survivors, and being transparent is huge. So if you're doing things via video, like Zoom, for example, just, doing things like I did. Hey, I've got dogs here. I can't leave them out of the room. They're going to bark. It's going to happen. It might be hard, like being really, really like describe what you're thinking and doing is what transparency allows. Notice if you see a change in someone when you're working with them, and then think back to what you were doing if that was a change, and check in with them. So it's a little bit like being hypervigilant without being hypervigilant for safety reasons, but being hypervigilant for building rapport and being transparent. So you have to do that more when you're not in person with folks. And then also making sure that, you're talking about, like when they can, you're talking about safety and what feels safe and what doesn't feel safe, so that when they don't feel like they can talk, you have a sense of what's happening for them. Does that make sense? Like, when they can talk, to talk about when they can't talk.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Are there any, that was all that's in the chat, but since we're paused, are there any other questions that people have?
Awesome. Okay. So if so, just jump in. So I don't expect you to answer this question. This is a little bit more rhetorical. So these are the signs of trauma and or dissociation. So a dazed look, a flat tone, speaking in a scattered manner, being unable to remember key facts, and someone then becoming angry and defensive all of a sudden. So these are all signs of trauma and also dissociation, except for the angry and defensive. Okay. So I just want you to know what those are, so that when you're seeing those, you can say, think to yourself, oh, okay, so I wonder if this person's dissociating and what might be going on. Which, by the way, Bruce, the big black lab, has just entered the space. So at any point in time, there could be an eruption of barking. Okay. Okay, so we talked about participation and some of the things that you can do for participation. So let's talk about credibility. So surviving traumatic incidents requires dissociation. It's pretty much like if there's trauma and the person gets through it, they've dissociated. So depending on the level of dissociation, victims may talk about the crime differently than adjudicators are used to. And that's that dazed look, that flat tone, that speaking in a scattered manner. So this is where it comes up again. So if you see this in the survivors that you're working with, then you want to help to normalize this. And you can do this ahead of time, and you could do it at the time, meaning you can do trauma training for your system folks so that they see ahead of time what trauma looks like. So you're not doing it at the time that you're trying to have the person that you're working with be credible. But then also, if it's a situation where, well, so if you haven't been able to do it ahead of time, then what you might want to do is normalize their behavior during the proceeding. And what you can do in order to do that is to bring in experts who can talk about it. And that has to be approved by the proceedings, the people who are running the proceedings. And then what you want to do is have people who have experience in trauma, and I'll say trauma and dissociation, because dissociation is a lot of the signs that we're seeing, and intimate partner violence, sexual violence, human trafficking. Because what we don't want is someone who gets one but doesn't get the other. And you want to reach out and develop contacts with mental health experts before. You want to, and if you have some, you also want to build that out so that you're not always relying on one person, just in case they're not available. Okay, so the problem is that in order to do that, there has to be disclosure about what this survivor is experiencing. And disclosure you have to think this through really carefully, because there's a lot of stigma around some aspects of trauma. So for example, dissociative identity disorder is incredibly stigmatized, and PTSD not as much as before, but you have to have a sense. Let's say you're working with child welfare. You have to have a sense of whether child welfare is going to see PTSD as an impact, as something that means that that parent is not going to do a good job. So you just have to be really cognizant of the potential impact to the survivor of disclosing. Okay, and so something as stigmatized as DID can have impact on their employment, their living conditions, their parenting, and can present a challenge in and of itself that it's been disclosed. So you really want to think through with the survivor the impact of that. And I'm gonna skip ahead here. Okay, so in order for someone to access our systems, again, the things that you want to put in place is predictability. So that is your key to success. Anyone that you're working with that has experienced trauma, if you make things predictable, let them know what to expect, let them plan ahead, prepare, have more time, then you're going to be much more successful. It limits anxiety. You want to limit stimulation so that people don't dissociate or have a difficult time remembering and being present. You want to limit noise and chaos, again, for the same reasons. You want to give people things in different modes of communication. And you want to talk with them about trauma-related issues and how you'll handle them. So this goes back to the prepare and plan ahead. So Courtney, I saw that you had your hand up.
Yes, it relates to something you said on the other slide as far as connecting with mental health providers ahead of time. One thing that I have gotten a lot of questions around, discussions for traffic survivors from the advocates is the bridges that they burn. what, you know, and it's really, really hard to create any kind of consistent care, because that, you know, that's what the survivor is seen as doing. Is that, do you have any anything to say
Yeah.
about that? Any way, magic wand
So
or?
yeah, so let me suggest something for you. And I don't mean to like kind of create more training, but here's the thing. I do a training with two other people. One person, I talk about DID and human trafficking from a lived perspective. And then the other person that I train with talks about she runs a program in Milwaukee called Convergence that's for trafficking, and primarily works with people who have DID, who are trafficked. And so she talks about it from the service provider perspective, very, very detailed guidance, really beautiful, like amounts of information. Like I've never met anyone that had so much to offer from that perspective. And then also the clinician that works with their program. And I would suggest that you have something like that come either virtually, or, I mean, I'm not traveling, but you know, we could find somebody else to do the lived experience. Come and either virtually or in person, train the people in your community, because that is actually, they're like missing the fact that people have DID and will show up different ways, and they're looking at it as burned bridges. So they're not actually responding well, and they don't know what they're working with, and they're not creating an environment that allows that person to continue the work. That is part of the healing process, right? They're going to get triggered, they are going to respond, and they're going to react. And those clinicians need to have that kind of understanding and training, to realize that's part of that process, so that it's not a burned bridge, or that they stop working with trafficking survivors because they're not doing a good job with them.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, and I can connect you to them. Like if you want to just have the clinician come in, I wouldn't do it that way. I would at least have the clinician and the service provider come in, because they have a really great approach. Like they create trauma response teams that involve volunteers and advocates and service providers. It's really, I mean, I've been doing this work for a while, and I'm super impressed with how they do this. So you can just reach, I'm going to put my contact information in the chat, and I can connect you to them if you want to just have them do it, or if you want the three of us, or whatever you want. We try to be super affordable, because we want people to get this information. And again, if you do something in person, they'll just have a different survivor do it, or they'll use a recording that I make or something like that. Okay. All right. So I don't really want to go into this as much, because I don't think this is going to be as big for you as preparing for negotiation or trial. This is more of a conversation about what to expect and informed consent. I want to kind of go here, because these are things that I feel that you can do. So planning for triggers. And here you want to, as you work with someone, you're going to see when they get triggered. And like I said, it'll look like dissociation, or they'll get combative, defensive, angry. It'll be, or hysterical. Those are the three kind of, they'll either withdraw, or you'll see like different responses like this, right? So plan for those, because they're going to happen. And what do they need when they get triggered? And if you aren't able to have that conversation with people, then learn how to do grounding techniques. And I sent Leah document I created that talks about grounding techniques. And if I didn't, Leah, let me know and I'll send it again. Or I'll send it this time. But grounding techniques help people to come back into the present. When someone gets triggered, they're going back to whatever incident is triggered. So they're gone or agitated because it'll feel like that incident to them. So that grounding technique is going to be really helpful. Also asking people, you can help people create grounding kits. So things that they keep with them that are small, like I have an agate that I have always with me. I'll use lip balm or essential oils or gum. Just something that helps me to feel a little bit more relaxed. Sometimes when I'm really kind of stressed out, I'll have hot tamales with me, the candy. There's something about those that I really love. So that kind of helps me. Just weird little things like that. Have that kind of conversation with people and they can keep a grounding kit. Encourage supportive connections. This is huge. Like I did a whole thing on creating community because of how healing it is. This is really, really important. This is how people continue their lives, right? So having connections in their life after violence or after healing. So encouraging that people bring people with them to whatever proceeding it is, if they trust them and feel comfortable with them. I do this as well with healthcare appointments. And then consider having support animals or service animals, wherever it is that you're working with folks. So I've seen DA's offices having these, and I've seen courts having these. And what I mean for the most part is dogs. It keeps people grounded to have dogs. Some people will have stuffed animals with them. Things that kind of just help them stay today in today. But I totally love, I used to have pictures of my dog when I would talk about emotional support animals. And then this is the key thing to remember. And I know that we're at the end of our time. So I just want to cover this really quick. This is what you want to do. You want to build trust. And in order to build trust, you want to be transparent. And when you notice a difference, so you're listening to what you're saying and you're watching what you're doing and you're making sure those match up. And when they don't match up, you want to hold yourself accountable and say something about it so that they don't feel like there's a pretense happening, because that's triggering. Don't rush. Rushing is really hard for people who have experienced trauma, people with DID, people who are neurodivergent. By the way, all of these things are universally helpful. So with people with disabilities, as well as people who've experienced trauma. Trauma is essentially a disability. So plan ahead to the extent that you can. Help clients understand what to expect. This is the predictability. It is so, so important. Learn about triggers and anticipate triggers. Have a plan for what you will do if you haven't had that discussion with them, or if they don't know what would be helpful for them. And practice grounding techniques outside of your work with survivors before you do them with survivors, so that it's not like something that you're learning with the survivor. They're super easy to do. It's usually identifying things in the room or feeling parts of your body, like, feeling your feet on the floor, your legs on the chair, your arms on the chair, your back against the chair. That brings people back in. All right. So we got through it all.
Hey, thank you so
Yay.
much, Olga. I don't know if you have any time to answer a couple more questions.
I don't, because I have a meeting now for
Okay.
a webinar that I'm doing on Thursday. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
But
I was going to say,
people can email me.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Perfect. All right.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Olga. Thanks for being here. If folks want to stay on for another minute, if you have any questions, I can either try to answer them or I can send you to Olga, depending on what the question is. And again, I'll be sending out resources. I'll let Olga go. Thanks, Olga. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being so participatory.
Yeah, I'll be
I'm gonna
sending
stop
out resources after this webinar series. So there was a first half that was really focused on DID, and I had already sent out recordings and resources for that. You can contact me. You can email me if you want some of those. If you haven't already gotten them, I'll put my email in the chat. So just email me. And I can also, but for the last 3 in the series, I'll also be sending out resources and things like that. Yes, Olga's email is in the chat, but I'm going to go find it. Here we go. Yep, there's Olga's email. I know, Maria, you asked this question. I'm not a clinician, so I don't want to give any information that, I'm not really qualified to give. But I would say it probably depends on the circumstance. I know that sometimes, I don't think it's uncommon for survivors to have thoughts about hurting the person that hurt them because, they're angry or they're upset or they want justice or, things like that. I would think of it similarly as you would think of, survivors with suicidal thoughts. Like, do they have a plan to commit the homicide or the harm? Do they, are there more red flags that's more than just like, gosh, they're upset, they're frustrated, and they're like, God, I just want to kill this person. And it's kind of more like a cathartic experience. If there's more red flags that are more like, I actually think this person might hurt somebody, that's when, you might need to have a more of a frank conversation of hey, I've heard you say this a couple times, and I'm wondering if we can explore that a little more, or do you want me to connect you with another, because I don't know what your profession is, but if they need a licensed therapist to talk to, or if they need to contact some sort of crisis hotline, or, depending on what your reporting requirements are based on your profession, do you need to alert the authorities because you actually think this person is going to commit harm? So those are all things that you have to take into account. And if anyone has anything to add.
Yeah, I was going to say the fact that they're unwanted, gives us a little bit more information, but like Leah was saying, there's a point where, is it a place where you do have to break confidentiality? But those are very disturbing and common things survivors, deal with. And so, and holding space for them, and and making those referrals.
Yeah, absolutely. And Maria, you're with Our Voice, right? Yeah, if you want to talk more about this, you can reach out to me or to Courtney, and we can provide TA around that, but, more one-on-one, but yeah, so not totally uncommon, but using your judgment to feel like, Are there any other questions? Yeah, thanks, Maria. Have a good one. Are there any other questions people have that maybe we can answer while you're here? I'll just give it a minute. All right. Well, thanks, folks. Have a great afternoon, and I'll be sending out some resources. Bye.
Thanks, Leah.
Yeah.
Bye.